everybody. We are back again. We just had our focus on the news segment. This is kind of an additional topic that we wanted to brush upon. We had the first topic on the hepatitis B vaccine, but now we want to shift and speak about this new doctrine that came out just yesterday from the White House, the National Security Strategy, which goes into and lays specific groundwork on the priorities and principles of which the Department of War will enact in engaging in the worldly affairs. So I want to go ahead and bring on Senator Black, and he will discuss a little bit about it with you, and then we'll have a back and forth discussion.
Okay, thank you, Morgan. Morgan and I have just finished a very good discussion that we had on the question of whether hepatitis B vaccines are causing or at all or part of the reason for the tremendous explosion in autism. Very good discussion. Not at all clear exactly what the cause is, but certainly the change in the new policy by the Trump administration, de-emphasizing the use of the hepatitis B vaccines. Very, very positive and very good news, I think, for parents who worry about autism. But in any event, the reason that we're having a very special segment today is that yesterday, the White House published the 2025 National Security Strategy. Now, the National Security Strategy is a document that is published by every president, and it really is the foundational document for directing the activities of all of the government agencies, but in particular the Department of State, the National Security Establishment, and the Pentagon. And so in announcing this, it provides structure for a really massive reorientation of United States foreign and military policy. And it represents a very dramatic shift. I would say that the shift announced by the NSS, National Security Strategy, is probably the most dramatic change since Richard Nixon's New China policy was announced in 1972. So that's what we want to get into. Both I and Morgan have been scrambling and trying to piece this together. So what we're going to do is sort of have an introduction to it, sort of first impressions, and we will be talking about this more as time goes on. Morgan?
Thanks. Yes. I think we were both kind of, I would say beneficially, I think it's better that we have an actual doctrine to say where we are going to go with, our national security and our diplomacy or engagements with other nations. I think you and I were speaking backstage, and I was saying I have some critiques on this. We can get into that kind of while we talk further. I think where we're at in this situation right now, the Trump administration has made this clear effort to try and de-escalate what's happening with Ukraine and Russia in hopes to resolve that issue. Same thing in essence, how they portray with going about what's happening in Palestine and Gaza and Israel. And I think you and I kind of shared some skepticism on the peace plan and how well it would hold up. And I think, it has kind of shown that Israel is continually violating the ceasefire agreement and not really holding up their end of the bargain as letting aid in and not doing targeted drone strikes to, the people in Gaza. It also lays out this difference of shifting priority to within our hemisphere. You and I discussed this about under this guise of targeting cartels. You and I kind of had a disagreement on, which I think you were very sound in understanding that you didn't want this to turn into a regime change war within Venezuela. And kind of my critique is that it seems like we are posturing in that direction, as opposed to really trying to confront some of the criminal agencies that benefit from pumping drugs into our country. So that's kind of laying the groundwork on some of where we might disagree in this new doctrine, but I want to get some of your takes as well.
Okay. Well, now the doctrine is, it's meant to be less granular than the actual on-the-ground policies. It's not just sort of a dream sheet of where we'd like to go, but it puts a logical framework around where we are and then where we intend to go. And it's a very sharp break with previous foreign policy. And I think there is a clear shift away from NATO, a sort of a diminishing of our inclination to sort of follow along, become one sort of the good old boys club with Europe and with London. And so the one of the big thing that it does is it does downgrade our closeness to European military objectives. And one of the most dramatic things is that it's now treating Russia not as a national security threat and all of this sort of thing. And it now starts talking about Russia as a strategic stability partner. This is what we want where we want to go. And so the idea, the language that's used no longer talks about its existential threat, its aggression, and this sort of thing. And it starts to talk about the war in Ukraine as in sort of an objective fashion. And so it begins to refer to it not in terms of Russian aggression or Russia as an existential threat, but it talks about it more neutrally as the Ukraine war. It says, yes, we have a vital national interest in the prompt resolution of the war, ending the war, and then stabilizing the European economies, preventing unintended escalation, nuclear war, and enabling the reconstruction of Ukraine so that they can survive as a viable state. But basically, our objective, from what I read into this, is to achieve peace in Europe, to back away. We specifically say that that our strategy explicitly opposes further enlargement of NATO. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the Soviet Union was a huge threat to the West at the time, but it collapsed. And when it did, it withdrew, and all that was left was the borders of Russia. There was a 1,000-mile buffer between NATO and the Russian border, 1,000 miles. And NATO, they, on a pledge that they had made to Soviet Union, if you'll cooperate with us in reunifying Germany, we will not move NATO 1 inch towards the east. Mm-hmm. We violated that, and we moved to where we attempted to go right to the border, which would have been 1,000-mile advance for what used to be a defensive alliance. And clearly it became a very hostile, aggressive military force that presented an existential threat to Russia that Russia was forced to respond to once we overthrew the government of Ukraine in 2014, replaced it with a more militaristic government, and then began this massive arms buildup so that Ukraine could push towards the Russian border. And so this sort of flips all this on its head, says we oppose further expansion of NATO. We're against it. That's very, very positive, I think. Additionally, we have downgraded the Middle East as a strategic priority. Now, that doesn't mean that we're sort of extricated from the swamp. We've still got Netanyahu wanting to attack every place on the planet and use American power to do it. If Israel had to rely on themselves, their own manpower, their own arms, their own economy, they would be a much more peaceful place than they are today. Mm-hmm. But they've been able to, they paid off everybody in Congress, just about, and they've got carte blanche to do anything they want. It doesn't matter how outrageous it is, whether they're bombing diplomatic places, whether they're, violating every peace agreement they've ever made, whether they're kneecapping teenage children so that they'll be cripples for life, as doing it not just once, but doing this over decades. And they would never get away with such a thing were it not for our support. Just the fact that in this NSS document, we are beginning to draw back from the Middle East wars, I think is a very positive thing.
Yeah, I would agree. The presence in determining our role in NATO, kind of NATO's role in provoking the engagement between Russia and Ukraine is a shift in the right direction. And I think you're right in the assessment that if we were not, the American government was not enabling Netanyahu and his government, that they would be forced to be good neighbors. And I think that's kind of where I wish we would shift. And we did see some signs initially in the Trump administration with Witkoff, going to Netanyahu and kind of being very strict and firm. And we kind of see this shift now, which I'm very critical of kind of the peace plan and not really holding up Israel to its end of the bargain of, what it initially agreed upon, which was the aid, getting in there and no more strikes. So I think those are, some good assessments to make. Some of my critique that I think we touched upon backstage was this notion, particularly within the Middle East, where it says, we're backing away from the engagement there, but we are going to prioritize that I'm paraphrasing in a sense, the oil and resources away from our competitors. We were speaking backstage, and I was saying with the ideologies that we kind of push as, in this capitalistic structure, what I think wins at the end of the day is if you're selling a good product and the person will want to give you, their money or their, other product in return if it's a bartering system. And so what are we putting forth? Are we putting forth, technology, resources? Like I would say, you see with China and the BRICS and the Belt and Road Initiative, how they go into other nations and they build, these roads for contracts for different resources. Are we meeting to that standard? Is that kind of where we should be shifting if we want to maintain dominance in, the area of having these resources. I think that is something that I find a major role in how we're conducting ourselves with Venezuela, is that we talked about how China had initiated this contract with Venezuela to get the oil off of their coast. And so I think BRICS and that kind of having China, Russia, and Iran stationed within our hemisphere is something that is actually the motive of going towards Venezuela, as opposed to actually what is its cited aims is like going against these narco terrorists. What are your thoughts on that? Are you kind of skeptical at how much pressure we're putting directly on the country of Venezuela as opposed to other countries, if our true aim is to go after the drug crisis that's facing American citizens?
Well, I'm sort of an army of one in my particular views. You have people who are opposed to the drug interdiction and going into Venezuela, and then you have the people who support those things. I'm oddly sort of in the middle. I'm not a fan of overthrowing governments as a general proposition. At the same time, I do support the introduction of these drug boats. These are extremely high-powered boats whose only purpose, you don't put batteries of powerful outboard motors on the back of a fishing boat, and they're designed to evade detection and evade capture. And you can literally see the stacks of, it's probably cocaine, enormous quantities of drugs that are on these boats. And I, to me, the flaw in Ronald Reagan's war on drugs, which was very good, he accomplished enormous good with the war on drugs. But the problem with it, the weakness was that it was never a war. It was a police action. It was run by the FBI, by law enforcement. And in my view, there is a place for a war on drugs. And the idea that somehow these cartel leaders who slaughter just untold thousands of people in Mexico and in Colombia, different places, especially in Mexico, is an enormously violent place. And they just brutalize the people of Mexico. And then somehow we say, we're very offended at the idea that we would treat the soldiers of the cartels with we would not follow precise rules and so forth. I don't have a lot of sympathy with the drug cartels. They're killing tens of thousands of people. Often in a single year, they will kill as many people, Americans, as we lost in 10 years of vicious fighting in Vietnam. And to me, it is a war. It should be a war. When we can interdict these boats, I say more power to it. It's sort of the way I might have felt back when we were sinking Nazi submarines off the shores of the United States. Certainly as justified as it was back then. So I got a little bit different take on it. And I honestly am a little bit more sympathetic to the Monroe Doctrine than most people in the peace movement would be. So it's a matter of a different perspective. But I find it very interesting that the strategy is very sharply critical of the European governments.
Mhm.
And it warns that Europe faces civilizational erasure tied to migration, demographic changes, and the loss of national identity. Amen to that. I mean, uh, I was reading. Now I don't follow events in Ireland that closely, but Ireland used to be one of the most conservative places in Europe, one of the most religious places, and then there was this deliberate flooding of Ireland with people who had radically different religious beliefs, radically different cultures, and I understand it's very controversial now, the idea of allowing Irish people to speak the Irish language. I didn't even know that really there was an Irish language, but apparently there is. And the idea that you would do it is somehow perceived as being unfair. And I'm also seeing things out of Great Britain where there is sort of a crackdown on the on Christian expression, and there's this idea. Well, now we can't really express Christian views. We've got to accommodate the multiplicity of religious views and so forth. Well, this is really what happens when nations collapse. Is they surrender their religious, their cultural values, their identity in every way. And right now they're just simply being swamped by floods of migrants who come over, not because they say, that's a wonderful place over there. The way of life is something that I long for and so forth. No, it's just these people have more wealth over there. I hate their guts, but I'm going to go over there and I'm going to get my share. I mean, we see this with the Somalis over here, with the huge scandal over the billions of dollars taken during COVID, where everybody in this one community up in Minnesota, all the politicians from the top to the bottom are Somalis, and we have top imams demanding that that Christians get out of their area. Christians have no role to play. So you see this erosion, and it's something we've got to get control of, because there is something wonderful about our culture, about our people, about you look at the way that we dealt with slavery, and then later with segregation, and it's something we should have celebrated, because it was a very dramatic thing to do away with slavery, and then it was a very dramatic thing to do away with segregation, because slavery continued in Africa until I think 1982 was the last country that, in Mauritania, they officially sanctioned chattel slavery, the purchase of people in Mauritania until 1982. And in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, they officially had on the books rules that allowed you to purchase human beings until 1962. So the fact that back in the 1800s, the United States rejected slavery was a monumental historic achievement that we should have said, look at this. Look at what we're a great civilization. We have achieved this. And we went on, with segregation, we went on to say, well, now we're going to open up to everyone. But instead of saying these are amazing achievements of a great culture and a great religious environment and so forth, we began to attack ourselves internally and say, well, we hadn't achieved perfection back hundreds of years ago. What's wrong with us that we hadn't achieved perfection? Well, give me a break. They continued practicing slavery in Africa until what was I doing in 1980? I was a lieutenant colonel serving in the armed forces over in Germany. So in any event, I think we should be taking some credit. But in any event, we're going to have to sign off. But I just wanted to have this quick introduction. Very dramatic change in doctrine, and so we will talk more about it, Morgan, and we can pick at it and see what we like, what we don't like. But I'm personally very, very enthused by it, and very pleased to see that we're starting to turn the rudder on the aircraft carrier and go in a more positive direction.
Yes, I mean, I would plead with the Trump administration that we need to definitely take this non-interventionist route, which was one of their principles within the strategy. But yes, I would love to have a longer discussion, kind of give our viewers more of an in-depth analysis on what's really in this national security strategy, and maybe we'll press upon that in the weeks to come. But thank you for giving me this opportunity to kind of talk about some of my what I took away from the security agreement, and I look forward to having more of a discussion about how we should really propel this nation. So thank you, Senator.
Well, thank you, Morgan. I really appreciate your work on the show today. We'll see you next Monday.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Next
Saturday.
Next Saturday. Well,
I know everything moves so fast. Sometimes I don't know what it is, but
okay, next Saturday, join us at 10 o'clock.
All right. Bye, everybody.